My name is Cassie Lambert. I'm 34 years old, live alone in Seattle, and serve as the CEO of a national wellness equipment company that I helped build from the ground up. From the outside, my life looks polished and predictable. Modern apartment full calendar, quiet efficiency. But right now, I'm sitting barefoot on my balcony, cradling a cooling mug of lavender tea in both hands, listening to the late spring wind rustle the leaves of a nearby tree and doing something I never used to do. I'm ignoring my phone. It's been buzzing on the table beside me for the past 15 minutes, rhythmic, persistent, insistent, in that way only family messages ever are. I know without looking that it's my sister, or maybe both of them, maybe mom. The group thread's probably lighting up the kind of digital commotion that once made me drop everything, but not today. Not anymore. The mug is warm against my palms, but the tea inside is already cold. I haven't taken a sip in 10 minutes. I don't need to. Just the feel of it in my hands is enough weight, enough heat to remind me I'm here and I'm still. I didn't used to know what stillness felt like. My days have always been filled, often overfilled schedules, back-to-back meetings that start early and spill late emails that never stop. I built my company from the ground up, negotiating contracts from conference rooms at midnight, dragging sample machines across trade show floors, sleeping in airports, and waking up to red-eye flight alarms. There's always been a fire to put out, a request to handle, a gap to fill. And not all of them came from work. In my family, I'm the steady one, the capable one, the one with no kids, no partner, and apparently no reason to ever say no. I became the person who rearranged meetings to babysit my nephew with the stomach flu, who overnighted money when the brakes on my sister's car gave out, who stayed up peeling apples for a pie because mom's arthritis was acting up again. I did it all quietly. That was my role. Cassie the helper, Cassie the rock. But lately, I've started to realize that being the rock meant everyone assumed I didn't need shelter. My phone buzzes again, more insistent this time. I glance at the screen but don't pick it up. Jessica. Then a follow-up from Emily. Then the notification lights up again. 3 missed calls from Mom. The weight of the world condensed into 3 names. I love, but love doesn't always look like care. Sometimes it looks like a series of small withdrawals, and lately my account feels overdrawn. Last night I stared at the blank itinerary pinned to my corkboard. I'd printed it months ago, just in case I could carve out a week away for myself. I hadn't filled in a single date. Something always came up. Always someone needed help. Someone needed me to stay. Someone assumed I had nothing else to do. When you're single and childless, people treat your time like a communal resource. But something shifted this week. It wasn't an explosion. No yelling, no breakdown. Just a decision made quietly and without anyone's input but mine. I'm not going to ask if they understand. I'm not going to explain. I'm just not showing up the way they expect me to anymore. Outside, the breeze brushes over my arms. My apartment sits 5 stories up, nestled in a quiet part of the city, where I can see the skyline but still hear the birds. There's a hummingbird feeder hanging just beyond the railing, and a tiny green blur darts to it. Now I watch it hover weightless and fast, sipping once, then flitting off again. I used to be like that, always flitting from one responsibility to the next, always hovering, never landing. I take a deep breath, not because I need one, but because I want to feel what it's like to inhale without tension. My shoulders don't tighten. My jaw isn't clenched. My to-do list isn't screaming. I feel still, and in that stillness, I feel something unfamiliar creeping in. Not guilt, not pressure, but something simpler. Space. I rise from the chair and step inside the mug still in my hand. My apartment is quiet, filled with soft light spilling in through sheer curtains. On my desk, the blank travel itinerary is still there, but now beside it is my laptop. The browser is open to a booking page. Just a few clicks more and I'll have something on the calendar that no one else approved, no one else knows about. The idea feels radical. When did it become revolutionary to plan a trip just for myself? I set the mug down and look again at the phone. The thread is still lighting up. I don't need to read it, I already know the rhythm. Can you do me a favor? Could you just swing by? We thought you'd be free. You always are. I close my eyes and breathe again. I know what they want. I know what they expect. And for the first time in my adult life, I know I'm not giving it. What they don't know is that I've already started packing. Not just my suitcase, but my boundaries, my voice, my permission to live outside the expectations they've etched into my role. I open the browser again and scroll down to the beachfront listings. Santa Monica, nothing too extravagant, but ocean view, soft mornings, and no one needing me to explain where I went or why I didn't answer. My phone buzzes once more, then stops. I let it. The lavender tea is cold now, but I drink the last sip anyway. Not for the flavor, but for what it symbolizes. A moment I didn't interrupt. A decision I didn't ask permission to make. And in that quiet just before the trip I haven't told them about, just before the silence becomes noticed, I finally feel like I've taken one step away from who they always needed me to be and closer to the person I've been waiting to reclaim. My name is Cassie Lambert. I've been the fallback plan for 34 years. But today, for the first time, I am no one's backup. I am my own beginning. There's a calendar on the wall above my desk, one of those oversized dry erase planners with colored markers assigned to different categories: pink for executive meetings, blue for internal check-ins, green for marketing approvals. But what stands out most aren't the business notes. They're the ones written in purple and orange, the colors I assigned to family babysitting on Saturday, pick up dry cleaning for Mom, overnight at Jessica's because her twins are sick. Check on Emily's new apartment lease. On most weeks, the family colors outnumber the professional ones. I used to take pride in that. Jessica is 28 and lives about 45 minutes south of me in a quiet suburb near Tacoma with her husband and twin boys Max and Ethan. She's a kindergarten teacher and a part-time parenting blogger. Her days are full, her patience often frayed, and somehow that has always translated into me being on call. I've driven across town in the middle of a pitch rehearsal just to sit with the boys when her sitter canceled. I've stocked her pantry during flu season. I've even paid her water bill twice because she forgot it was overdue and didn't want to get a late fee. Emily is the youngest. She's 26 and a free spirit, her words not mine. An aspiring ceramic artist, newly married and known for disappearing into creative retreats at odd intervals. She's the one who once asked me to pick up her entire wedding dress because she had a migraine from too much wine after her bachelorette weekend. I did it. I waited in line for over 40 minutes. The woman at the boutique kept smiling at me like I was the mother of the bride. Neither of them means to be unkind. I don't think they even see it. It's just become part of the rhythm. When there's a problem, Cassie will handle it. She always has. I can trace the beginnings of this pattern back to childhood. Our parents, Ken and Marlene, were never cruel, but they were the kind of parents who believed in dividing attention by perceived need. Jessica had health issues growing up, chronic ear infections, food allergies, delicate lungs. So naturally, Mom hovered. Emily was the creative baby prone to tantrums moods or elaborate drawings that needed framing. I, being the healthy, quiet one, became the afterthought, not out of malice, just convenience. There's a photo album somewhere with a picture of me on my 8th birthday wearing a paper crown and holding a slice of chocolate cake. Emily's crawling onto my lap, her face covered in frosting. Jessica's in the background, throwing a tantrum because her balloon popped. I'm smiling, but not at the camera. I'm watching them. That became a kind of metaphor, me holding the cake, watching everyone else. I got used to being the one who didn't need. In high school, while Jessica went through her first heartbreak and Emily flunked her math final, I quietly applied for scholarships. I didn't tell anyone when I got into the University of Washington on a full ride. I just printed out the acceptance letter and taped it to the fridge. No one really asked how I was paying for tuition. I'd already set the expectation that I could handle things on my own. I did 4 years of undergrad and 3 graduated early, took an entry-level role at a fitness equipment company, and worked my way up while pursuing an MBA at night. No one came to my graduation. Jessica had a parent-teacher conference. Emily was backpacking through Europe. Mom said she was proud of me in a voicemail. I never responded. And still I gave. I bought Mom a new dishwasher the year the old one broke, paid for a month of Jessica's rent when her husband lost his job. Let Emily crash on my couch for 10 days while she waited for a spot in a downtown art co-op. When Dad slipped a disc and couldn't shovel snow, I drove up with salt and a shovel before the sun came up. They all thanked me in the way. People thank the mail carrier or the barista. It's polite, expected, nothing memorable. That's the part that stings the most. It isn't just the tasks, it's the erasure, the quiet way they've made my life their convenience store, my calendar, their safety net, my finances, their plan B. There's a candle on my desk that I lit 2 weeks ago. Burned it straight through during a night. I stayed up prepping a product pitch and monitoring Jessica's twins over a nanny cam. She had a date night and the babysitter canceled. Again, the candle's wick is burned to the glass. I haven't thrown it away. I keep staring at it like it might say something to me. That night, after I closed my laptop and sent off the investor deck, I found a thank you note on my kitchen counter. A scribbled drawing from Max, one of the twins. It had a stick figure labeled Auntie Cassie and a lopsided heart. I stared at it for longer than I should have. Not because I was touched, but because it reminded me I'd accepted that as enough. A 5-year-old had thanked me none of the adults had. I wonder sometimes how things might have been different if I'd just said no, once. Not a loud no. Just a firm, unwavering pause. Maybe at 22 when Jessica asked if I could co-sign her car loan, or at 25 when Emily's lease fell through and Mom suggested she stay with me, or maybe even last year when I spent 3 days baking, decorating, and cleaning for Mom's 60th birthday while everyone else drank wine and posted selfies. But I didn't. Because when you've been trained to give, saying no feels like betrayal. It feels like dropping something fragile, like disappointing people who never once asked if you were okay. I sit back now and look at the calendar again. It's mostly blank this week. The purple and orange markers are still capped, the only note scribbled in black. Cassie time off hold. No one's asked yet what I plan to do with it. I'm not going to tell them. I walk to the kitchen, turn the faucet on, and rinse the burned-out candle jar. It's cold in my hand, empty but clean. And for once, that's how I want to feel. The night it all shifted didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It happened over roasted chicken and a side of garlic mashed potatoes in the dining room of my parents' house in Tacoma. It was a Sunday dinner, something we tried to do once a month. Jessica brought her twins, who were already halfway through their mac and cheese. By the time I walked in, Emily was glowing as usual, dressed in some flowy linen jumpsuit. She probably thrifted from a boutique that charges triple for charm. I brought dessert. A peach tart from a place downtown that I'd stood in line for, even though my calves were still sore from a business trip that had ended 12 hours earlier. No one commented on the tart or the trip. We sat around the table, plates passed to the clatter of forks against ceramic, filling the gaps between polite conversation. Dad was retelling a story about a tire blowout from the 90s, and Mom was correcting every detail. Jessica was cutting up chicken for Max. While scrolling on her phone, I was trying to feel present, trying not to glance at the time, even though I had an early Monday call with a distributor in Toronto. Then it happened. Between bites, Emily leaned back, her hand resting on her barely there baby bump, and said it like she was announcing she'd tried a new salad dressing. Well, we finally booked the place, Glacier View Lodge. It's going to be incredible. Hot springs, cabin, fireplaces, snowshoeing trails, the works. There was a pause at the table just long enough to signal something had landed out of rhythm. I looked up. What place? Emily blinked at me, then glanced at Jessica. Jessica froze her fork mid-air. Mom reached for the salt like she hadn't heard a thing. I tried again. What's Glacier View Lodge? Jessica cleared her throat and gave a nervous half laugh. Oh, right. We thought someone told you. Told me what? That we're doing Mom's birthday trip there, Emily said brightly. It's a whole week in Montana. Everyone's going. It's a surprise, sort of. But not really, because she picked the location. I stared at them, trying to understand what I was hearing. You're all going to Montana, I asked. When? Jessica looked down at her plate. Next month, the 12th through the 18th. I didn't speak, I just did the math in my head. That was the same week Mom had asked me to take off just in case, and the same time I'd been asked no expected to send $3,000 to help cover some of the cost for the birthday plan. You told me to keep that week clear, I said quietly, but no one told me it was for a trip. Mom looked up, then her expression careful. Well, Cassie, it's not that we didn't tell you, it's just the details were still being finalized. No one told me it was in Montana. I said no one even told me there was a destination. Don't be dramatic, Dad said, his voice casual. It's not like you'd enjoy it anyway. Cold weather, big crowds, you like things quiet. Something in me buckled. Then, not in a loud way, not in a fall to pieces way. It was internal. A small snapping of the string that had kept me tethered to their expectations for years. So I said, still measured, you've all booked a vacation, a lodge cabin's hot springs, and I was never invited. There was a long silence. Jessica finally spoke, but her voice was coated in defensiveness. We didn't think you'd want to come, and someone needs to stay with the kids. I looked at her. You mean me? It just made sense, Emily said quickly. You don't have any ties. And you're amazing with the boys. And my baby's due soon, so I'll need someone who knows how to handle toddlers. I picked up my water glass. My hand was shaking slightly, so I set it back down, carefully, softly. So I'm funding the trip, I said, and babysitting while you enjoy it. You make it sound like we used you, Jessica said, her tone sharp. I didn't respond. It's not like that, Mom added. You're just capable, reliable. Everyone has their role. My role, I almost laughed, but nothing about this felt funny. What's your role then? I asked. Yours, Dad's, theirs. Silence again, the kind that fills a room with weight instead of air. You're always so touchy, Dad muttered. I pushed my chair back and stood. No one moved to stop me. I just wish I said slowly that once, just once, someone would have asked if I wanted to be part of the memory instead of the one left behind to make sure everyone else had theirs. Emily frowned. You don't have to be so cold about it. No, I said I don't, and I won't. I walked toward the entryway, passing the side table where someone had left a printed itinerary. I didn't pick it up, just stared at it long enough to let the words blur into an image I'd remember later, Cassie's exclusion printed neatly in Times New Roman. No one followed me. Not a word as I pulled my coat from the hook. Not a sound when I opened the door. But just as it clicked shut behind me, I heard Mom's voice low and resigned. She'll cool off in a few days. She always does. I stood there on the porch, staring out into the dark. Their porch light flickered once. The air smelled like dry leaves and leftover barbecue. I didn't feel rage, not even heartbreak, just something quieter. A final shift into awareness. I was never meant to be included, only depended on, never celebrated, only needed. And now finally I saw it for what it was. The trip would go on. The lodge would be beautiful. The kids would be dropped off at my door. Unless I did something different. Unless I said no for the first time. And meant it. The drive home from Tacoma was quieter than usual. I kept the radio off, no podcast, no navigation. Just the sound of tires humming against the road and the occasional sweep of headlights passing by. My hands stayed tight on the steering wheel. Not from stress, but from something else. A steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Something had cracked open at that dinner table. And for once, I wasn't rushing to seal it shut. By the time I pulled into my garage and stepped into my apartment, the weight of the evening had settled. Not heavy, just clear, like stepping into a room that had always been cluttered and seeing for the first time where the walls actually were. I kicked off my shoes, left my coat draped over the back of a chair, and walked straight to my desk. The apartment was quiet. I didn't turn on the lights, just let the moonlight and the glow from my laptop screen paint the space in soft silver. The travel itinerary I'd printed months ago was still pinned above my desk, blank except for the heading Time Off Hold. I'd told myself over and over that one day I'd fill it in, when things calmed down, when work wasn't so intense, when the family didn't need me. But they always did, or said they did. I opened the browser and typed in the only words that felt right: beachfront rentals, Santa Monica. Nothing extravagant. I wasn't trying to run away. I just wanted silence that wasn't soaked in guilt, rest that didn't come with a favor waiting on the other side. It didn't take long. A small studio near the pier, walking distance to cafes and the beach. Bright windows, a terrace just wide enough for a chair and a cup of coffee. I stared at the listing, the cursor hovering over the Book Now button. And I clicked. A confirmation email slid into my inbox. Seconds later, I opened it, read every line twice. Then I left it open on the screen just to prove to myself that it existed, that I had finally chosen myself. I leaned back in the chair, exhaled, and let the stillness settle. Then I drafted the time-off request, short, direct. Subject PTO request, March 12th, 18. Hi, Elisa. I'll be taking personal time during the week of March 12th. All projects will be aligned before I leave Best Cassie. I hit send. No apologies. No explanation. Just the truth, finally typed into a space that had never asked me to justify my worth. I stood and walked to my closet, pulled out the soft canvas beach tote I'd bought on a whim last summer, tags still attached. I set it beside the door. It looked strange there, like it belonged to someone else, a woman with space in her life, a woman who could say without flinching, I have plans. It was after midnight by the time I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring. Cassie. Her voice was tired but expectant, like she'd been waiting for the call. I won't be staying to watch the kids, I said softly. No anger, just clarity. A pause. I'm sorry, she asked, though. I think she already understood. I know the trip is set, the lodge, the itinerary, but I wasn't invited, I was assigned, and I've made other plans. She let out a slow breath. Cassie, don't be like this. You're taking this too personally. I'm taking it exactly as personally as it is, I said. The kids love you. You're good with them. You always say yes. I always said yes, I corrected. Her voice hardened slightly. We just didn't think it mattered to you. That's the problem, I said. It does, it always has. You just never asked. She didn't respond right away, then sharp and clipped. Well, I hope your little vacation is worth the trouble you're causing. And she hung up. The silence that followed wasn't painful. It was familiar. But this time, I wasn't drowning in it. I was just letting it sit. The next morning, my phone lit up before I'd even gotten out of bed. Jessica. Are you serious right now? Emily. Mom's upset. Real upset, Jessica, again. This trip is important. You're being selfish. Emily, I don't know what's gotten into you. You used to care. I didn't respond. By noon, the group thread was a storm. Jessica. The boys are already asking about you, Emily. If something goes wrong because you bailed, that's on you, Mom. I can't believe you'd let this ruin everything. I scrolled through them once, then muted the conversation. The rest of the day was quiet. I packed slowly, a few sundresses, my old camera. The novel I'd been meaning to read for over a year. I bought sunscreen, a new pair of sandals, and a zip-up hoodie for the cooler evenings. I laid them out carefully next to the beach tote, now half full and waiting. By the third day, the texts had shifted from guilt to anger. Jessica, you don't deserve a vacation after this. Emily, you're abandoning the people who love you. Mom, your father is deeply disappointed. I read them all, then I deleted them. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. I wasn't abandoning anyone, I was simply stepping out of the role they'd assigned without consent. The night before my flight, I sat on the balcony again. This time the tea was warm, the breeze was gentle. I watched the sky darken and felt something inside me settle. The group chat stayed silent that night, or maybe I just stopped checking. At 6:45 the next morning, I rolled my suitcase to the door. I slid my phone into airplane mode. The tote was slung over my shoulder. The confirmation email was still starred in my inbox. I took one last look around the apartment. Everything in its place. No notes, no spare keys on the counter, no last-minute calls asking for one more favor. And then I left. Not in defiance, not in anger. Just finally, completely, and without apology. The third morning in Santa Monica began the way I'd hoped it would. Quiet, soft light stretching across the floor, the ocean murmuring just beyond my terrace. I stepped outside barefoot, a hotel mug cradled in my hands, steam rising from fresh coffee. My journal lay open beside me, a smooth pen tucked between the pages like a bookmark of possibility. I hadn't opened my phone in 2 days. Not once. It had stayed on airplane mode in my tote, zipped away behind sunscreen and a paperback novel with a cracked spine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what I might be missing. I was simply present. I wrote in my journal slowly the way you stretch after a long nap. March 14th, 6th, 42 a.m., sunrise golden. Quiet, walked the beach barefoot yesterday. Bought a small wind chime from a local artist, I feel still whole. No one asked. No one checked. I paused after that last line, unsure if it was meant to be a sorrow or a truth. Maybe both. By late morning, I wandered through a stretch of local shops along Ocean Avenue, touching fabric, smiling at strangers tasting jam samples on tiny wooden spoons. I bought a scarf in soft seafoam green and wore it wrapped around my shoulders like a quiet rebellion. Around lunchtime, I settled into a corner of a cafe overlooking the pier, ordered fish tacos and an iced hibiscus tea, and watched the seagulls squabble over French fries. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't dramatic. It was enough. Just after 1 o'clock, I returned to my hotel, washed the sand off my feet, and finally almost reluctantly slipped my phone out of the tote. I turned off airplane mode and let the flood begin. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Dozens of notifications lit up the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, messages stacked on top of each other like bricks pressing in. The first text that caught my eye was from Jessica. "Where are you? The boys have been outside your building for 30 minutes. I blinked. My chest tightened, but not from panic, more like disbelief. Emily's message came next. "Seriously, Cassie, we dropped Ava off with the boys like we said. The sitter never showed. No answer. Are you home or not?" I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the phone in both hands. The room was quiet except for the dull hum of the ceiling fan. They had dropped the kids off anyway. Despite my call, despite the texts, despite my clear repeated no, they assumed I would change my mind. "Jessica, again, Mom is freaking out. The twins are scared. We left them there because we thought you were just being dramatic." Emily. What kind of person abandons their niece and nephews without even a heads up? I scrolled further. Dozens of variations of the same message. Guilt, confusion, outrage, but all of it built on a single staggering assumption. That I'd be there. That I'd cave like I always had. I closed my eyes and exhaled, not because I was overwhelmed, but because everything was suddenly so clear. This wasn't about the kids. It wasn't even about the vacation. It was about the fact that I had stepped out of a script. They never realized I was tired of reading from. I opened my voicemail next. The sitter's voice came first. "Hi, Ms. Lambert, just checking in. I arrived at the address you gave me, but no one was here to greet me or drop off any children. I waited 30 minutes. I'll send a formal incident report to the agency. Hope everything's okay." I opened the confirmation email from the agency to double-check the time, the address, the plan. Everything had been set, clearly documented, paid in full. My plan was airtight. Their failure wasn't mine. The next voicemail was Mom. "Cassie, this isn't like you. We trusted you. Your father's upset. You made us look careless in front of the whole extended family. How could you walk away like that?" Walk away? They still thought this was temporary, a tantrum A phase. Then Jessica's voice clipped and furious. "Do you even understand what you've done? You've made Mom cry. The boys are asking why Aunt Cassie isn't answering the door. How do you sleep at night?" I sat perfectly still, the phone resting on my thigh. Fingers loose around it, I looked toward the sliding doors. The sea was still there, rolling endlessly. Indifferent, calming, honest. How do I sleep at night? Like this. Without waking up to a group thread demanding a ride, a favor, a babysitting shift. Without swallowing resentment in order to be the good one. Without begging silently to be noticed beyond my usefulness. I took a breath and turned my phone screen off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. That evening, I walked the beach again. My sandals dangled from one hand. A family nearby was building a sandcastle, their laughter soft and warm in the breeze. I didn't envy them. I didn't ache for that kind of belonging. Not anymore. I just watched content to exist alongside them, not within their world. I took a photo of the sky as it turned orange and lavender and saved it as my lock screen. Not to post, not to prove, just to remember how it felt. Later that night, I returned to my journal. March 14th, 9:18 p.m. They dropped the kids off anyway. No call, no confirmation. They trusted the pattern more than my words. I kept my word, and they finally saw what happened when I didn't show up. The last line I wrote slowly, each word deliberate. Let them see what silence really costs. I put the journal down, turned off the lights, and lay in bed with the window cracked open. Somewhere in the distance, music played from a rooftop bar. I smiled, eyes closed. They had expected me to fold, but I didn't, and their chaos proved just how tightly they'd wrapped their lives around my compliance. That wasn't love. That was convenience. And tonight I didn't belong to it, not anymore. I arrived home on a quiet Thursday afternoon, the Seattle sky, its usual soft gray like a blanket tucked too tightly overhead. My carry-on suitcase rolled smoothly behind me as I approached my apartment building, the wheels making small, steady sounds against the sidewalk. Everything felt still, almost suspended, but the moment I turned the corner and saw them, the air shifted. My mother, Jessica Emily, standing in front of my door. They weren't speaking to each other. Each one held their silence like a shield, arms crossed, jaws tight. Jessica's eyes flared the moment she saw me. Emily looked like she'd rehearsed what she wanted to say. My mother stood between them, her hand already in her coat pocket. She had the emergency key. My steps didn't slow, but something in me braced. I hadn't expected them here. Not this quickly, not this confrontationally. I figured the silence I gave them in Santa Monica would hold for a little longer. I was wrong. Cassie, Mom said sharply, "We need to talk." I nodded once and unlocked the main door to the building. They followed without asking. No one asked if they could come up. They just did what they always did, entered. At my apartment door, I paused. My hand hovered over the lock, then lowered. I turned and waited. "You could have answered the phone," Jessica said first, her voice already sharp. "You could have told us what you were doing." "I did," I said. "You just didn't believe me." "You left the kids in limbo?" Emily snapped. "The sitter never showed." "She did," I said, unlocking the door and stepping inside. "You didn't meet her." They followed me in, like shadows spilling over the threshold. Jessica dropped her bag on a dining chair. Emily crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. Mom closed the door behind her and immediately began scanning the apartment like she had a checklist in her mind, looking for something out of place, something that might suggest this was all a misunderstanding. I walked to the kitchen, poured water into the kettle, and set it on the stove. "I don't even know where to start," Jessica said behind me. "You left us scrambling," Emily added. "We were an hour late getting on the road." Mom was in tears. "I'm fine now," Mom interjected stiffly. "But I shouldn't have to be recovering from my birthday." I didn't turn around. The kettle ticked against the burner. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence they tried to stretch. "You knew what this trip meant," Jessica continued. "We asked for one thing. 1 week, and you decided it was your moment to rebel." Rebel. That word sat strange in my chest. I turned slowly, meeting their eyes one by one. "No," I said calmly. "It wasn't rebellion. It was the first time I didn't fold." Emily scoffed, and look what it caused. I let that hang in the air. Then I spoke again, slowly, clearly. "You planned a trip without me. You asked me to send money without telling me what it was for. You assumed I would stay behind and watch 5 kids without once confirming it, and then you dropped them off anyway. You didn't check. You didn't ask. You just believed I'd be there, like always." The kettle began to whisper, heat rising. Jessica's voice rose. "You didn't have to make it some big statement. You could have just told us what was going on." "I did," I repeated. "But what you really mean is, I didn't act the way you wanted. That's not the same thing." My mother moved toward the kitchen counter, her expression hard. "This family has always worked because people stepped up when needed. You used to understand that." I turned the stove off and poured the hot water into my mug. The steam curled upward as I set it down gently beside me. "No," I said, This family has always worked because I stepped up when no one else did. Jessica crossed her arms, her voice tense. So what, now you're just done with us? I'm done being the piece that holds it together quietly. I'm done being treated like a utility instead of a person. Emily's voice dropped to a lower register. You could have just said you didn't want to help. I shouldn't have to justify rest, I said, or ask permission to not be exploited. There was a pause, then the kind that feels like the edge of something sharp. Mom's face changed, not soft, not understanding, just controlled. I always thought you were the one holding this family together, she said. Turns out you were just waiting to walk away. I stepped around to the counter and opened the top drawer near the door. Inside was a small dish where I kept spare keys and stamps. I reached in and pulled out the extra emergency key, the one Mom had used to let herself in that afternoon. I set it on the counter. Then I picked up the drawer and placed it inside a cabinet, closed the door, and turned back to them. That key's not needed anymore. Jessica stared. You're serious? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. You've changed, Emily said quietly. You used to be kind. I haven't changed, I replied. I've just stopped performing. Mom's eyes narrowed. Is this who you really are? Then, cold, ungrateful. I met her gaze. No, I'm just finally someone who doesn't confuse being useful with being loved. None of them responded. The silence felt thick, full of unfinished sentences. I walked to the door, opened it slowly, and waited. Jessica picked up her bag. Emily walked out without another word. Mom stood there for a moment longer. I hope your little vacation was worth what you've lost, she said. I didn't flinch. It wasn't a vacation. It was a return to myself. She stepped out without saying goodbye. I closed the door behind them. Then I locked it from the inside. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finally home. I picked up my mug, still warm, and returned to the couch. Outside, the clouds drifted. The light shifted. Somewhere below, a car honked faintly and disappeared. I took a sip of my tea, set the cup down, and let the stillness return. This wasn't a war. This wasn't revenge. It was the first day of peace I didn't have to earn. 3 weeks passed before I realized the silence wasn't just absence, it was space. No more daily texts asking if I was free. No frantic voicemails with breathless requests. No cold guilt wrapped in polite questions. My phone, once a leash disguised as family love, now stayed quiet most mornings, and I let it. At first, the quiet felt unfamiliar. I caught myself still reaching for it, expecting the next crisis. But after a few days, my body began to relax. My shoulders dropped from their usual perch near my ears. My jaw unclenched without me noticing. And for the first time in years, I woke up not to a to-do list, but to a question. What do I want today? I started writing that at the top of every page in my journal, a plain linen-bound book I bought from a small shop in Fremont, cream-colored pages, just wide enough to contain the pieces of a new life. Some days the answer was simple. A walk in the park, a new recipe, a hot bath with the door closed and the music turned up. Other days it surprised me. Sign up for a class, reach out to that woman from the gallery, look up flights to Italy. That last one started as a passing idea, but it stuck. So I pulled out the folder where I kept all my someday plans. Tucked between a dusty Paris itinerary and a faded postcard from Barcelona was a half-filled sheet labeled Florence, Dream Trip. I ran my finger down the list. Uffizi Gallery, Ponte Vecchio, a cooking class with fresh basil and flour-dusted countertops, sunlight over terracotta rooftops. It didn't feel like fantasy anymore. That night, I booked a one-way ticket for June 3, months from now. Enough time to prepare, enough time to let it feel real. I printed the confirmation and stuck it on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. A soft, subtle reminder. This life is mine now. That same week, I joined a Thursday night art class at a local studio just a few blocks from my apartment. I hadn't held a paintbrush in over 10 years. My strokes were messy, my colors too bold, but no one corrected me. The teacher, a gentleman named Theo, nodded at my work and said, "You're not trying to paint something perfect. You're learning how to see again." That stayed with me. On the second night of class, I met Marissa. She sat across from me sketching an olive tree in pencil. her hair twisted into a low braid, fingers stained with charcoal. She smiled when she caught me glancing. "It's crooked," she said, pointing at the sketch, "but I like it that way." By the third session, we were walking home together, stopping for tea at a little place that stayed open past 10. She told me about photographing Iceland alone at 28, how she once lived out of a van for a summer and documented wind patterns, how she left a relationship when she realized she was shrinking. I told her a little about my family. Not everything, just enough. Marissa didn't ask for more. She just said, "People don't always notice what you lose when you're reliable. They just keep asking for more." I nodded, and for once I didn't feel the need to explain. At home, I began making small changes. I took down the key hook by the door, the one labeled spare that used to hold the emergency key my mother still tried to use like it was hers. I replaced it with a tiny framed print I found in the art studio's supply bin, a watercolor sun rising over mountains underneath in pale lettering. "You begin again." I filled the windowsills with herbs, basil, rosemary, mint. I played music in the morning, not to fill the silence, but to celebrate it. I bought a new pair of walking shoes and wore them to the farmer's market every Sunday. I started cooking just for myself. Dishes no one else liked, spicy things, tangy things, meals that made me feel like I was feeding someone worth the effort. The texts still came from my family, short, bitter ones at first. "Jessica, I hope your little solo trip was worth blowing up the family, Emily. Don't expect us to reach out again, Mom. You've made your point. I'm not sure what you want from us now." I read them once. Then I muted the thread for good. I didn't respond because I finally understood that silence wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary, one I had every right to hold. It didn't mean I didn't love them, but love, real love, cannot live inside expectations that consume you. A few days later, Marissa and I were walking near the water, watching the last streaks of pink leave the sky. She said, "You seem lighter than when we met." "I am," I told her. "I think I stopped mistaking guilt for responsibility." She nodded. "That's not a small thing." "It wasn't." Sometimes I still thought of the kids, Jessica's boys, Emily's little girl. I missed them in a way. Their laughter, their open arms, their way of seeing me without asking for anything I hadn't offered. But I reminded myself that one day they'd grow up and see the family patterns more clearly. Maybe they'd wonder why I stopped coming around. Maybe they'd ask, and maybe then they'd understand that love isn't measured by how many times you say yes, but by whether you were given a choice. By the end of the month, I'd packed away old photos and placed my sketchbook on the living room shelf where the holiday family portraits used to sit. One morning, I stood in front of my fridge, sipping coffee, staring at the train ticket printout to Florence. Departure June 9th, from Seattle to Rome, then Florence by rail. It felt like a promise made to myself and kept. I picked up my journal and wrote the question again. What do I want today? The answer came easily this time. Peace, sunlight, a little lemon in my tea. And maybe, just maybe, a second sketchbook for Italy. The cab pulled up to my building just after 9 on a rainy Wednesday morning. Seattle had stayed the same gray clouds swirled over the skyline, and the sidewalks glistened with mist, fresh and familiar. But I had not. I stepped out, rolling my suitcase behind me, the wheels clicking over the concrete. My shoulders were a little sun-kissed, my bag a little heavier from too many olive oil bottles and hand-bound journals collected over months in Florence. I had left in June with a one-way ticket and a rough plan. I returned in October with no regrets. As I reached my front door, I paused, key in hand. A quiet breath moved through me. Not nostalgia, not anxiety, just presence. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of rosemary and cedar. My herbs on the windowsill had dried into little sculptures. The framed watercolor sun still hung where the key hook used to be. The air was still but not stale, like the space had simply waited unchanged, undemanding for me to return. I set my suitcase down and took off my shoes. Everything was just as I'd left it, yet it all felt different, lighter. I made tea without thinking. Muscle memory. Water into the kettle flame. Low a mug pulled from the shelf, I reached for the tea tin tucked in the back of the cabinet, and found something else. Instead, a small sticky note folded over itself and slightly curled at the edges. I opened it gently. Auntie Cassie makes the best pancakes, love Max. My breath caught. I leaned against the counter, the note still in my hand. The handwriting was crooked, the letters big and wide, drawn with a crayon. I hadn't seen Max in a year. I hadn't seen any of them. For a second, I felt the familiar ache rise in my chest, nostalgia wrapped in longing, the kind of soft pain that tugs without breaking, but it didn't pull me under this time. I smiled, carefully folded the note, and placed it in the drawer with my spoons. I wasn't throwing it away, I was just putting it where it belonged in the past, but not erased. The tea whistled. I poured it into the mug and carried it to the living room. I sat by the window, the same window where I'd once stared out and wondered what my life could look like if I chose it on purpose. And now I knew. Florence had given me more than art and language and sunlit mornings. It gave me myself. I'd wandered through gardens alone, laughed with strangers in shared kitchens, sketched under cathedrals with Marissa by my side. Her camera always ready, her stories always bigger than both of us. We still talked. She sent a postcard last week, just a photo of a quiet mountain road and the words, "Still traveling, still free." I sipped my tea and opened my journal. A new one, clean blank, with the words, "Year 2" on the first page. I wrote slowly. October 4th. Welcome home. Not the home they used to walk into uninvited. Not the life built around someone else's schedule. This home is mine. I paused and looked around. There were no baby toys in the corners, no group thread buzzing on my phone, no calendar packed with obligations that wore a mask of love. There was just me, and that was enough. I missed my mother sometimes, the way she tucked blankets around me when I was little, her humming in the kitchen while she baked. That version of her still lived somewhere in memory, but I didn't miss the woman who used guilt like currency. I didn't miss the silence that followed my no. And I no longer craved her approval, because I had finally learned what it felt like to approve of myself. It hadn't come easily. There were nights in Italy when the loneliness pressed in, when I almost reached for the phone, almost sent the message, "I miss you. Are we okay?" But I never hit send, because I knew what waited on the other end wasn't reconciliation. It was a reset back to the old role, and I had already laid that down. I closed the journal and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the glass. No one needed me to make dinner. No one was waiting for me to reply. No one had access to this version of me unless I offered it freely. That, I realized, was the quiet joy of starting over. You get to choose what comes with you. And for the first time, I chose peace. It didn't shout, it didn't glow. It just sat beside me, steady and sure. Welcome home, I thought again. Welcome back to the life you built with your own hands. No more proving, no more pleasing. Just living. And that I knew would always be enough. Cassie's journey reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly sipping tea in the stillness, choosing not to reply. For years, she gave everything, her time, her energy, her silence, to keep the people she loved comfortable. But when she finally said no, not with anger but with clarity, the world around her shifted. What she lost in approval, she gained in peace. And what she found was something deeper than validation. A life lived on her own terms. In choosing herself, Cassie became the kind of strong most people never notice until they no longer have access to it. If you've ever felt unseen, over-relied upon, or mistaken duty for love, her story is your mirror. Let it remind you you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to begin again. If this story moved, you share your thoughts below and follow for more true stories of quiet strength and self-discovery.